Hello and welcome to Think Watercolour. Today's demonstration sketch is all about using light against dark and warm against cool to create depth in a painting. And the other thing I want to demonstrate is the use of elements to create a mirrored composition lines to lead the viewer's eye around the painting. So in this picture, the V shape of the foreground hedge is mirrored loosely by the positioning of the distant birds. You have to be fairly subtle doing this sort of thing, but it does help to lead the eye of the viewer around the painting and create some depth as well. This sketch was inspired by the fact that it's autumn in the UK and farmers have been busy baling hay in the fields, so many fields have this golden ochre look to them. So let's get started. The paper I'm using is Saunders Waterford 300g rough paper, and I'm starting with the sky. This is a mix of mostly cerulean blue and a touch of cobalt blue for the patches of blue sky showing through the clouds. I'm painting wet on dry paper, which allows me a little bit of control, and just dampening the edges with some clean water around the edge of the blue areas, and just adding a little bit of yellow ochre for the shadows on the clouds. This is going to dry much lighter, so it'll hardly be noticeable, but it's just enough to suggest a little bit of shadow. It's supposed to be a bright sunny day, so I don't want the clouds too dark and too heavy. And just lifting out a little bit, a few patches with a clean damp brush. Okay, I've let the sky dry, and I've added a little bit of lavender to the sky mix just for the distant hills, just to suggest that it's going to dry much lighter, and I want the distant hills to be very, very light. Again, it's this business of light against dark, cool against warm. And for the foreground underpainting of the hills, I'm just using some lemon yellow and some yellow ochre. Various strengths mixes, just blending wet in wet, just to suggest some darker patches in the fields. For the distant hills, I'm using Prussian blue with a tiny amount of sage green. I want them to be bluish and very light when they dry. This will dry much lighter to suggest distance. Again, it's that lightness suggesting distance against the stronger and darker tones that will be in the foreground. For these foreground hedges, I've just darkened the mix a little bit with a little bit of jadeite green, just to make them a little bit stronger, so that when they dry they'll be darker and bring the eye forward in the painting. In a couple of the fields, I'm just adding a little bit of sap green just to break up the uniformity of it, and just using a little bit of dry brush and the side of the brush to put some darker patches in the fields. It just breaks them up so they're not just a patch of bright yellow or golden colour. For the foreground hedge, I'm using some jadeite green with a little bit of cobalt blue, just to put some initial darks in, and just using the side of the brush to use the tooth of the paper to have this dry brush technique, and then just with a little bit of clean water just softening it down. I'm going to let this dry and go over it with some more darker patches shortly. This foreground hedge needs to be fairly loosely painted. I don't want to try and paint every branch and leaf and twig. For these darker patches, I'm using jadeite green with a touch of neutral tint just to give it a little bit more strength. Just trying to vary the darkness in the foreground. And as you can see, the minute you start putting these darker patches in, the background tends to recede, and those distant hills are almost invisible, but they're still there, but it adds to the depth of the painting. I'm being very loose and abstract with this foreground hedge. I really don't want to try and paint too much detail. It's that time of year in autumn when, although the hedges are still green, there's a few patches where they're starting to turn brown. It's early autumn yet, so everything's still fairly green. And I'm just using a rigger here just to indicate some of the twigs and branches of the hedge. Very loosely painted. It needs to be messy because at this time of year the hedges tend to be messy before they get their winter cut. I'm just adding a few flowers. These are to suggest a few poppies. It's that time of year where you see poppies growing in the hedgerows. A few yellow patches for some other flowers, and I'm just using a rigger to splatter some different colours on the page. And finally, where I've managed to splatter a little bit on the sky, I've used that to those dots to create this V shape of the birds, which matches the hedge, as I said earlier. It just helps take the eye around the painting. And I think I'm done. I hope you found this demonstration useful. Warm colours against cool colours and dark colours against light colours help to create that depth, and makes the painting look more realistic, even though it's quite abstract in the foreground. Do give it a like if you found it useful, and please subscribe and hit the notification bell for future videos. And thanks again for watching.